Welcome to CPE Voices, our series through which we present insightful discussions among industry thought leaders, moderated by our editorial team. Today, we'll be discussing effective incorporation of AI into CRE practices and how those opportunities are evolving. I'm Suzanne Silverman, Editorial Director of Commercial Property Executive, and I'm here today with some knowledgeable experts who are ready to share their observations and experiences with you. Kapil Lahoti, Chief Digital and Technology Officer at CBRE, Tim Savage, Ph.D., CRE, Clinical Assistant Professor at the NYU Schack Institute of Real Estate and Faculty Director of the CREFC Center for Real Estate Finance, and Cliff Taylor, Director at Yardi Systems. We're recording this session and it'll be available for later viewing. In addition, we're going to leave some time at the end to answer your questions, but please feel free to submit them at any time during the webinar. And thank you to those of you who submitted them in advance. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Let's start with the more theoretical, how to think more broadly about incorporation of AI. And Tim, I'll start with you. Most companies are still trying to figure out how to incorporate AI most effectively into their strategy. What's the best way to think about its incorporation into your organization?
Yeah, so it requires a little bit of a step back in time and history, and to reflect in particular on how it's being incorporated into commercial real estate. And to do that, I have to go back in time and talk about the famous Tordo Wheaton Research Group, that was ultimately part of CBRE, that I had the honor to run for many years. and Bill and Ray helped to innovate this industry a great deal. They said, look, we can use CBRE's data and we can begin to forecast. So we can forecast rents and vacancies and ultimately even cap rates to help the industry evolve. And at that time, there was not much going on in the space of AI or in the use of AI in real estate. So Bill and Ray became the ground truth for the industry. And the industry has evolved since that time, and large industry players now have their own data science teams who are trying to deploy AI or machine learning with their own proprietary data sources. And that is an evolution that I find, frankly, fascinating. Because at one time we had the ground truth with Ray Tordo and Bill Wheaton. We've lost that ground truth. But the tools themselves can be used in deal making. They can essentially be assistants to the debate across a table as to what a property is worth. And that, I think, is a fascinating evolution.
Interesting. Thank you for that background. Anybody else have anything to add? Cliff, let me ask you, how do you recommend approaching the decision of what should or could be automated?
Yeah, good question. The one of the main things that you can think about when you're starting to roll out AI in your company is to think through where you're going to have early wins and snowballing those to get the team on board. It's a very tactical thing, but we all have this idea that say AI can do everything and then get lost in the clouds of where we can go in the next 2, 5, 10 years and change the whole world. But to start today is one of the hardest things you can do and say, yes, it can change everything, but what do we want to start with today? Find that early win and then let that roll into the next one and the next one, the next one. And it goes to changing kind of the hearts and the minds of your team and how they work with AI, as opposed to maybe being afraid or maybe being distant from it. They can be involved in that process to start with what is the one change. It could be something as simple as using AI to automate your meeting notes and assign action items and hold people accountable to to-do lists. So something very, very tactical internally. And then that can roll into, hey, can we then start using a similar tool to do that for our construction meetings on site with the tenants and our vendors so that we're all on the same page? And that snowball effect will help your teams become comfortable with the technology. It'll help you open up ideas. The creativity behind applying AI is really important as well. You can get really creative, but being able to ground that in something and move it forward one step at a time. Like a couple examples would be, do we just want to start off with automating work order closures for the operations team on buildings? Do they have to go back to their desk to click close on all 13 things that they did? Or can we help them free up time to interact with tenants, to have that conversation of, here's what I did. We're really excited to have you in the building. Is there anything else you can have done on site? Can I help you with something else? And you're freeing up that time. And so very much that ability to dream big, start small, and let the team continue their momentum forward is a really good way of thinking through where you want to apply AI to your businesses.
So not working too hard to come up with that big opportunity, but just start small and get yourself used to thinking about what it can do for you.
And by the time you do that part, the technology is going to continue to change every 2 to 3 months. The leaps are huge, and that will help you really evolve with the technology as it goes through. And that way, as you get those big creative ideas at the start, by the time you get around to working with them, the technology is there to help you. And we've seen that over the past 18 months in leaps and bounds.
Great. Kapil, as you've had direct experience in your company, how do you recommend getting started on a viable plan and separating AI hype from the tools and use cases that truly deliver business value? And what have you done with your company?
Yeah, if you're starting on a plan for AI right now, I would say there are five fundamental infrastructure elements to get in place. So, data, the platform, governance, resourcing, and also looking at the overall change management aspect of it, right? So let's look at data first. AI will be successful if you organize your data well. So it's no longer about just volume of data, but how discoverable that data is and whether you have the right protections, the right rights to use the data in a model. With machine learning, the focus was more on just the quantity of data and working through that quantity. But now there are more aspects with generative AI. So getting that in place and getting a data foundation correct is one fundamental part of it. On the platform side, if you really want to adopt AI at scale, you need to decide what's the platform you're going to use to deploy different models. If you're doing just one or two use cases, it's fine. You don't need a platform. But if you're doing it at scale in an enterprise, like we have to do, we do need a platform. You can decide whether you want to build a platform yourself with components available by the big AI companies, or you want to just outsource the entire platform. Either way, you need a platform. Right? Then we go to the governance around it. So once you start with a platform and data, you'll have a number of use cases hitting you. So how do you decide which use case to chase, which ones add value to your business? Going back to your value question, what is hype, what's not hype? You need a very strong governance process around it. What data you can use, what data you're allowed to use, and how does it manifest itself in the model? Again, you need a good governance in place. Resourcing, this is a very tricky part because the fidelity of your models, the way you impact your business, relies a lot on the type of data scientists you have at your disposal. It also relies a lot on the business users, how many forward-looking business users you have who understand the domain and are able to use this technology well. Because I firmly believe that this is the most democratized technology we have seen. where a business user can build models instead of just relying on technology folks, right? So you need the right resourcing plan in place, both from the business side as well as on the tech side. And finally, change management. The models won't work always perfectly. And the first thing when AI fails is like, hey, AI doesn't work. No one, I mean, oh, your accuracy is only 95%. Really, like humans have accuracies less than 80% most of the time, right? Yeah, so saying that your accuracy is only 95% is the first thing I hear when we come up with some model, right? So that's another important part of how you understand the where AI works, does not work, and train your frontline workers to use it well.
Sounds good. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to add to that?
I want to just quickly jump in. Couldn't agree more. So when I joined CBRE, there was a very prominent broker whose name I will not use. And this individual was very skeptical of our forecasts. And I was living in Boston at the time. And I said, may I train down to New York and meet with you and perhaps go to a client meeting? And this I did. I have no idea whether CB got the deal or not, but this very prominent New York broker, very prominent New York office broker, said, great job. Are you willing to come down here more often for meetings to try to explain to potential clients the role that forecasting and AI plays here? And once we did that, this individual didn't have to understand the algorithms behind what we were doing, but this individual immediately identified that we were a valuable input to trying to sell business. And I think that is certainly in commercial real estate a very important thing to consider.
Yeah, and Suzanne, to your point of how to separate the hype from business value, I think we need to remember that AI cannot be the strategy. The business outcomes is the strategy, right? So if you just make it very simple and say, I will not have a separate business case for an AI project, but AI is just one of the solutions for an existing business case which drives value, that will make it very easy to separate hype from the actual business outcomes, right? And frankly, we are beyond the hype stage in terms of technology. The AI is already impacting our lives daily. So we should get over that and just focus more of how do we leverage it versus just debating this question whether it's still a hype or not.
That's a really good point, Kapil, because it's so easy for us human beings to get so
Mm.
focused on it because if it's new to you personally, that becomes the focus. And that's a very good reminder that it shouldn't be the focus. I like how you said that it's a solution.
And again, let me just jump in here
Sure.
quickly. When you're in the classroom with 25-year-old graduate students, they have lived with this technology in one form or another their entire lives.
Mm-hmm.
So when I teach complicated financial models, I always start with the very basics. And the students will raise their hand and say, may I record this course or this lecture? And I say, of course, I have no problem with that. And then they come to office hours with whatever variant of AI they're using to summarize what I've been talking about. And they say, is this correct? Is this what you thought or said? And I said, yep, that's exactly what I said. Or it is exactly the point I wanted to make about this particular financial model.
Well, it's a good thought that they're also thinking to check that, because there is that question about accuracies and hallucinations. I know we had a question from one of the registrants who maybe is on live with us, but and when we get to the Q&A, we could talk more about that. But that is something to keep in mind as well. That younger group that's so accustomed to it being part of their lives is more likely to realize automatically. Cliff, what do you recommend doing to minimize roadblocks? For instance, how do you ensure clients' data and workflows are set up for successful implementation?
Yeah, Kapil hit this point really well in his 5 points. Where he's talking about data and platform as kind of the first two items are really important. The roadblocks are there naturally, and they usually fall into two buckets. Is it team buy-in and people and change management, which was his last point, or is it technology and data related? Can we do this? Is this accessible? And the team buy-in part for change management is, I think, something that the industry has been doing well and evolving at, is bringing folks in, having them have that ownership, and then working through it, defining what the problem is, how do we want to come up with our desired outcomes, and then building the process to go forward with it. And Tim's story there of, training down to New York and taking a detractor or a skeptic and turning them into an evangelist is so common. You have these folks that really like what they're doing, and they have this process that they know works. They take this value from this cell in Excel, they paste it to this website, they do this thing, and they move it over to this other Excel file, and then they upload it over to this SharePoint site. And this system was great for the past 10 years, and it's not broken. And getting their buy-in into, hey, well, what is the outcome you're actually looking for here? Is this to fire off a notification? Is it insight? What are you doing by this process? They'll buy into that process so well if you bring them in early. If you make them part of the solution, you get these folks that become the evangelists for AI and for change management within their small teams or within the overall organization. And so finding out who those people are, they're not necessarily always the ones that are jumping to change everything on the team. They might be the ones that are those skeptics, but bringing them in, helping them define that process, and then what is the outcomes they want, not just what is the process. So current state and then future state with outcome driven is really important early on in that process, because it goes to that change management. The other side is the technology. If your data is separated amongst 10 databases, 2 Excel files, and a SharePoint list, it's really difficult to figure out how to automate anything. The data models don't necessarily line up. You have a lot of data cleansing, duplication. Perfect example is if you have a really great work order system that you're trying to automate, but the work order system doesn't know who the tenant contact is for maintenance. It only has the billing contact for your leasing. You run into a problem where you now have to do a lot of extra work to figure out how to jump over to find the right person. And if that data is not available to an AI agent, you always are going to have a problem. So cleaning data, coming up with what is your data platform? Is it your operating platform? Is it something like a data lake? But making it meaningful, accurate, and then, of course, making sure that the right people have the right access. Not everybody needs to know every broker's payout criteria or every contact for every lease. Some of that stuff really should be controlled and done well. And whether your operating platform or a data lake has something like that is really important. I think a lot of the industry has spent time in the past 5 years building those tools, and now they can take advantage of it. But coming up with the people and the technology organized so that you can determine outcomes is really, really key.
Thank you. Kapil, how will AI implementation change the roles on the team, or how have you already seen them change roles on the team? And how do you balance the use of AI tools versus the human touch?
Yeah, AI is already started reshaping roles by removing low value work and emphasizing or amplifying expertise, right? So people who have expertise or domain knowledge will gain more and more traction, and using AI as a co-pilot to do the mundane work or repetitive work, right? So if you think your expertise is really doing the same repetitive work correctly every time, that role is at risk, right? Because that can be done with AI. But if you are, as a part of a job, you do repetitive work, but you apply your domain expertise to it to increase value, you'll be doing your work better and faster than this first person, right? And you will also get more value in the organization. So the first thing we'll see in the role changes is the emphasis on expertise, the emphasis on soft skills, like how can you then use your time to negotiate better with your clients, with build better relationships. So the softer skills will get amplified way more. Luckily, AI is still a little curt, and it is not that friendly. We in fact had an incident where one of our agents said that the other agent is disobedient. So they've gone into this world where agents are complaining about other agents. So they're getting a little human in nature, but it's still more on the complaining side, right? It's not on the soft skill side. So that's where we can excel and be better. The other part of role changes, I think, is applying judgments apart from expertise, right? So we still need the human to not only apply judgment, but also to give feedback when the models fail, right? So human in the loop remains a critical part right now. I'm sure there'll be a time where AI will self-correct. It's coming close, but for now, human in the loop remains an important component, right? And maybe Tim, you would know this better, but I've heard that history professors and all are getting a lot of money to just check AI accuracy.
No, that's quite true. And again, so going well back when I first started teaching at NYU, before I joined CB, there was a famous image of data science, which was three interlocking circles. And at the top was domain knowledge. I believe fervently that in real estate, domain knowledge is preeminent, right? Again, this person whose name I don't want to mention could name every deal this individual had done in 10 years in New York City. She could this individual could list cap rates. Um, uh, this individual could list values. And it was absolutely amazing to see this individual in a meeting. And that came down to domain knowledge.
I
That is
think that
something. Go ahead.
moving up the value chain of where all of us are have the domain knowledge or have the expertise is something that AI has done so far, and it's taken off that busy work from a lot of our plates, and a lot of our clients when we implement them see that the busy work that disappears, and they move up the value chain and they start becoming effective at where they are really good at their job, and it's really fun to see that happen.
They don't have to do all the research. It's pulled in for them and readily available, and the analysis and the
But it may not be
interpretation.
accurate. That's the point is it may not be accurate.
So you still need somebody checking that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was the point about having historians come in.
Yeah.
And saying, yeah, we did go to the US did go to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Britain was conquered by France, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Are there any new skills or new types of skills or a new I know you mentioned the emphasis on the soft skills. So that might be an example of a greater focus on a type of skill. But any new skills beyond that you need to ensure are in place among team members, or that you recommend adding that maybe you really didn't think about before? And Kapil, I
Critical
don't know if you've.
thinking.
Yeah.
Like I love hammering on critical thinking because it's such an important thing. And hopefully Tim sees this in the classroom where kids come up through education and they believe everything they heard. And sometimes they challenge it,
Mhm.
but that critical thinking of having folks say, is this right? Do I believe this? Can I back it up if I were to say this is really important. And I think historically, just within kind of Yardi or even in the industry and real estate, the ability to say, is this right? Can I go back it up? Can I dig into this? Can I challenge it? It's something that our best people do really, really well, and it's subtle, but they will continue to build that skill set out. And the earlier we can get folks to embrace that critical thinking, hey, this value came in from AI. What do you mean we didn't go to the moon? Wait, can I drill down on that? Like, it's a really important thing. And we do it a little bit, hey, I'm going to Google this thing. Like, do I trust that? Or let me check 3 or 4 links. But with AI, it's quicker, it's easier. And having that critical thinking skill to say, is this right? Do I believe this? Would I own this? Is super important. And yes, at some point, we will continue to trust machines a lot. But having that small second thought of critical thinking and testing it mentally is so important.
Yeah, I think I'll double down on that. Problem solving, critical thinking becomes important. And of course, there's a technical aspect of it also, right? You need to have the right skills in your team who understands when to apply AI and when not to apply. When not to apply is as important probably as when to apply, because if you have a very deterministic process and you're trying to put a probabilistic model, which is what AI is, then obviously the answer won't be correct, right? Or you're deviating from the deterministic path for no reason, right? I mean, you're just increasing your cost of operation and for no reason. So you need some level of understanding from a technical perspective. And the third is skill apart from critical and technical is data and analytics, right? Understanding what data is, what is clean data, how much to invest in cleaning what data, just understanding your data landscape and how to make the data relevant for that context is a very important skill, I think, which you'll see more and more of.
Let me jump in there. Data cleaning is really important.
Hmm.
When I was doing my dissertation work, it took me 3 months to clean a data set. And I was working, a great deal like graduate students did just to get a clean data set because my dissertation advisor, who consistently made the point about estimation bias, and he said, if your data are not pristine, I don't care what your statistical estimates are. The core idea of estimation bias is basically having data that are not clean, which means they are not accurate, and then trying to fit an algorithm around that. And no algorithm can step around measurement bias. It's just not possible because they're just algorithms, they're just machines, and they don't understand this stuff. And that is a concern I have generally about AI. Is there is evidence that it is beginning to reintroduce bias to human decision making, and um, I think that's a concern to have. And I'm happy to hear the folks on this call saying, yes, we do recognize this stuff.
So to that point, Tim, how do you ensure continued success, and what kind of pitfalls or risks do you need to guard against, and what kind of guardrails do you need to put in place to ensure you're getting that value and not introducing too much of the downsides and the risks?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the classroom, my guardrails are very different than they were when I was in industry. In the classroom, I just want students, when I teach this, to understand both the strength and the limitations of using algorithms in decision making. And I do this in a really simple way. Um, oddly enough, using something we call the central limit theorem. But I want students to understand this because they are so, I will not say technologically sophisticated, but they're so attuned to technology. You take a New York subway ride, and we now have connectivity everywhere on the New York subway. People don't put down their phones, and it that I just find a worrisome thing from a human perspective. And I say this is, I'm just a data nerd, but I find that worrisome from a human perspective.
Kapil, do you have any particular recommendations about guardrails to put in place or ways to test effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a pretty deep topic, I would say. I would say for now is that uh, there's some you need to first test and when the outcomes, like what outcomes you are expecting, right? And then within whether it performs within that outcomes. That's the first thing to start with before you start exploring completely undefined outcomes. So that's the first, I think the easiest way to start with. And then of course the guardrails along what data is, that goes back to the governance question, like what are you compliant? Are you using the right data? Do you have the data rights? But just from an output perspective, understanding, starting with cases where we know what the outcomes are and getting comfortable with how the model behaves is the easiest way, I would say. A very simple answer to a pretty complex question.
Mm.
Mm.
Cliff, how do you measure success, and what metrics or benchmarks do you recommend to evaluate whether AI initiatives are succeeding?
Yeah, it's really important when we're rolling out agents with our clients and we have those discussions around current state. We're trying to measure, like, how do you want to say that this thing is good or bad? How do you want to say that we should continue putting electrons into the model for this outcome? And it can vary so much, but it has to be part of the early discussions. It can't just be that, oh, we're going to AI this, right? We're going to AI our meeting notes. Well, what do we want to do about that? If they're just going to collect dust on a web page somewhere that no one refers back to, that doesn't really help move the needle on us. But can we hold people accountable to action items? Can we start off by saying, here's the action items from last meeting? They were taken down automatically. We all agreed, and then start off the next one forward is a really positive outcome for success and measurement to move that forward. And so defining those as part of the current state discovery and making sure that the future state has those in there. It can be as simple as, did the tenant get communication faster from the on-site team? Or did we know that exceptions were happening in real time as opposed to at the end of the month when we go through our accounting month end that our AR is not balancing? So like super tactical pieces, but it could be as simple as the time to knowledge is sped up. And so determining those off, whether it's communication, time to knowledge, or that this person can now take on 10 properties within their portfolio or within their scope of responsibility as opposed to two, and we're getting more consistent updates. All those things are really good ways of looking at the success, but defining them for each instance where you roll out is really important. And as you're putting together those discovery groups or having those conversations as where you want to apply, should be done early. And having that be something you stress test and validate on the end is really important. Another way of looking at it is that future state may change completely on what metric you're looking at. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to happen faster. You could have it happen 500 times during a month as opposed to one time at the end of the month. That's really a good outcome because you're getting the information quicker and sooner to the actions and the people who need that information. And so there's a lot of moving pieces there, but typically it's how quickly do people know? Are we alerting the right people? And are we handling things in the background within the visibility over the top of it? Bunch of different ways, but really important to decide them up front.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple more questions, but we're getting a lot of questions from the audience, so I'd like to turn to some of those and address some of your more direct concerns. The first one, or whoever would like to address it, what are the high ROI use cases that are being done by people today, and what are the new high value use cases that cannot be done by humans?
Yeah, I can take a crack at it. So if you look at near term, the highest ROI cases are from well-defined high volume businesses where outcomes are already understood, right? So that's the easiest way to go about doing this first, because you know what you're getting at, and you already probably have a business case lined up to automate that process, right? It's high volume, high friction process. So in the context of real estate, what does that mean? In the context of real estate, the highest friction comes from uh, number one is the tons of documents we have to process. And the number two is the very manually intensive process work of delivering services, right? And Cliff referred to a few of this, right? Like on the frontline side, everything is pretty manual. So if you look at those frictions in the process and you start seeing how can AI remove that friction, how can we process documents faster, how can we abstract the conditions from the documents, interpret it more intelligently. Again, it's all about reducing friction. So if you just add them up and take an end-to-end process, not just one use case, but an end-to-end process, the number adds up to a pretty material ROI, right? So you have to look at it from an end-to-end process and removing friction throughout the process. And by the way, this technique is not that new, right? I mean, if you think about how RPAs came about in the old days, that's how people started looking at it. It was not that successful because um, the way some of the concepts were applied, AI gives a lot more flexibility in an ambiguous environment than RPA could. But the concept is the same, removing friction in the process.
Yeah, maybe a couple pieces to like give very direct answers on there from kind of the software side that we've seen it have really great success. And very early clients have addressed these for high volume and manual processes, right? Stuff that people don't love doing. Work orders, leases, and payables. And we've done a lot of work around payable ingestion and being able to code data, alert users. And then that's stuff we've done for 5, 10 years. But recently it's moving forward and saying, you're comfortable with the coding. And we've watched your approvals go through, 10 steps of escalations, alerting people through a workflow. But 99% of invoices from your OpEx partners come in for exactly the same amount as last month as they did the prior month, and it's this month. So do we need all 10 people to click the approve button? Or can we say, hey, 99% of the time, this one's good. Let's save you 13 minutes of expensive people's time and just say, yes, it's approved. Go for it. You're moving forward. And that high volume, low, kind of low intelligence work is so incredibly impactful for a business because you no longer have holdups. You have much quicker times for folks to get what they're doing on a given day in, as opposed to pulling up an app and clicking approve on a payable. And so those are the ones that I love implementing with clients, is very narrowly into work orders and payables, because so much of it is repetitive. So much of it is easy for AI to say, given that you've done this 6,000 times already in the past year, we're pretty sure that you're going to click the green button, not the red button. Can we do that for you?
Great, thank you. For smaller real estate companies looking into AI, is there a central source to research different options for implementing AI? So recommendations for smaller companies to get started in a practical way.
Cliff will say use Yardi.
No, so again, when I'm in the classroom, because NYU uses Gmail, which means we have access to Gemini, and that's what the students record me on, and that's when they come back to me. I don't, again, I don't think that there is any ground truth to this because at the core, these are just algorithms. They're being trained. They are getting better. I would not deny that at all. But it very much depends on who is using it and what it is being used for. And that's just a cautionary tale I would tell you as a very old econometrician.
Yeah, and I would just also add for smaller companies, frankly, this is as I talked about democratization of technology, this technology early on, right? For smaller companies also, actually, this gives the best hope of going fast with technology. Because if you think of some of the old big changes happen, move to cloud, so service-oriented architecture, they were very heavy tech intensive, big organizations moved faster because they had the resources to invest and they had the skill sets. But AI is like you're seeing so many Y Combinators cropping up all over the place right now because it's easier to code with AI and it's easier to get some results faster, right? So I actually feel if you apply the right platform or and which could be you could just get a third-party platform if you don't have the resources to build one. But if you apply the right platform and more importantly, organize your data well, and identify the right use case which is relevant for your company. Don't try to chase something which is ambitious but doesn't apply to a small company. So this will keep your cost in under control of using AI. Then this actually you can get to value faster than you could with some of the earlier big technology changes.
Yeah, and I think that accessibility is really a fascinating evolution as we
Mm.
think 5, 10 years ago and moves to data lakes. They were expensive. They took a lot of time. They took the right people knowing the right information. This AI change is happening so much faster, and the barrier to entry for so many companies is so much easier for them to jump in. Um, it really becomes fun for them. They can start testing, try things out, and if it doesn't work, they can move on. And that kind of observe, orient, decide loop can happen much quicker as they want. And they can have discussions with AI to say, I want to try this. What's in the space? And the tools are there for that research for, for companies to jump in and have those discussions without having to be narrowly defined. And whether it's inside of their operating platform or with their own data, the barrier to entry being super low makes it quite capable for small companies to jump in on and not have a huge downside where they have to risk large amounts of capital on a wrong decision.
Right. That's just the idea. Fail quickly. Just make an attempt and fail quickly
And then move on.
and
If
move
it's
Try
on.
not
again.
right, move on.
Yeah. And learn.
Mhm. What is the best place to start to learn the plethora of capabilities and features of AI that are available in a structured, sequential way without incurring the large spends as we were just talking about? I'll start with that part of this person's question, because it seems to follow on what you were just talking about.
I'm sorry. I'm going to jump in here. That is an excellent question. As an economist, I freely recognize that economists have failed people multiple times. But we became disciplined and we became very analytical. So this laptop is sitting on two of my favorite econometrics books. There has been a mathematization of life, and I challenge my students to say, to understand within real estate that this is an industry that is relationship based. If you wanted a life of quiet contemplation, you'd go your PhD in economics. Instead, you're getting a master's of science in real estate. And you will, in your lifetime, be working with your fellow students and against your fellow students across a table. But trust in the negotiation, trust that the person on the opposite side is presenting an idea and saying, okay, the cap rate is 4% and you think the cap rate is 5%. Let's figure out a way to come together on that. And my students are really surprised when I talk about this, given my background. But I learned at CBRE how important trust is. Trust in your colleagues, trust in your competition. And I think that's an important lesson for young people to learn.
Along the lines of trust, and I referenced this earlier, let's talk about the trust in AI. Accuracy is paramount in real estate. How do we deal with AI's notorious random hallucinations? And how do you manage AI drift and error, even if data is compiled and clean? What's the best way in this real estate realm to cope with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, there are some technical ways to deal with it also, right? So that I won't get into that on this call, but there are many technological things you can do to reduce hallucination. So that's number one, of course. Number two is don't be in a hurry, right? So don't be like what I've seen, and I've seen this in many demos, is people come just wrap a call to OpenAI or something and just say that, hey, I have the answer, right? So it's not as simple as making an LLM call and whatever gets returned is the right answer, right? So you need to set up a structure of giving the right context to the model and a structure of checking the output also, right? How do you go through predetermined outputs and see whether it matches? How do you give feedback to the system to say this is wrong, right? So those are some guardrails you have to put around the process. But I think a lot of it is also driven off some very deep technological methods you can use. So couple that with the second thing which I talked about, gets you most of the way there, right? And then the third thing is to understand where to apply it. I'll again repeat what I said earlier. If you just keep trying to replicate everything with AI, even all the most deterministic steps, then you are just wasting time trying to correct it to do what a simple if then else statement can do, right? So you need to make it work towards more ambiguous problems, more easy to understand problems for it, but repetitive. So see where the value comes from, right? Because you not everything has to go through this AI machine. You're just introducing more variables, at least as of now. So if you go with that approach, you can narrow down the problem set to high value problems and which are more applicable to the type of AI you're using, right? So for example, as I said, technically you can say that in this case, I'll just use a machine learning algorithm rather than a generative AI model. That itself improves the accuracy quite a bit if a lot of math is involved, right?
One of the to add to that, one of the things that we've really enjoyed doing in our kind of development journey of AI over the past couple of years uh, is that the costs have gone down so much, right? It's not as expensive to make AI calls as it was last year or the year before. And so you don't have to bet the farm on one specific question. We can do things where we have one model read the same data, come up with an outcome, have a different model read the exact same data, come up with another outcome, and then have another agent challenge the two outcomes and say who's best. And if the confidence is low, we can return and try it again. And that idea of the probabilistic models coming up with slightly different outcomes for a lot of things, you can use that to the advantage here to say, let's try it out. And if it doesn't cross a threshold where we're comfortable with this being really harsh, we can revert it and try again. And if we fail 3 times, let's bring in the human to make that determination. And you don't have to necessarily fire and forget on a system. Human in the loop is really important where there is a low confidence that something is successful, and building up systems and agents in a way that you have that idea of double checking or being aggressive to test out the underlying assumptions on an output has become so easy with all of these agent flows that it's something we build in naturally into our agents. That way, the outputs are much more reliable as opposed to saying, well, this is what the system came up with. We have to go with it. We can test, we can challenge, and we can revert many times for almost no cost, which is incredible growth from where we were 2, 3 years ago.
Great. Thank you. I'm thinking about all the different ways that is applicable in so many different areas. Another question.
And
Go
can I
ahead.
just jump in?
Yeah, please.
It is amazing. I mean, we've heard about Moore's law, but the reduction in computational costs is, I think, a really important feature that involves humans just learning to do things differently and more efficiently. And and we got Moore's law out of this, and computational power today is so much better than it was even 20 years ago.
Another question. What ripple effects will Moltbook have, and how soon, and how consequently, and in what ways? If anybody's got an opinion on that.
I'm not more of a social media guy, so it's a it's a wrong question to ask. But
Okay.
if you reach a stage where we think that there will be some ripple effects, but agents talking to each other, fine. That just shows how much extra time we are creating for ourselves with AI, right? We're using it to watch other AIs talk to each other.
Do you think it's helping to evolve things in a practical way, or it's more just conversation that the rest of us should ignore?
There's a lot of thinking behind that. Like, what does it mean for bias? What does it mean for society? Uh, I think I think my day is fully filled with thinking about real estate. There are other smart people who are thinking about society and bias and social implications. So I'll leave it to them to talk about Moltbook.
Okay. We've got a few very focused practical questions. I guess the overall one, and Kapil, I think you were the one talking earlier about human roles versus what will go to AI. So this is kind of the overall big elephant in the room question. Will AI result in a loss of CRE jobs in the future? Or will they just be different?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, right? There will be the repetitive jobs I mentioned will get lost or will be done by less number of people. In some cases, you will do more work with the same people, right? The typical paradox you have. Uh, but definitely the roles will shift amplification. Now, whether it's a net loss or not, I would say that there will be some loss for sure. I mean, I don't think so we can avoid that. But are there more new business models which will prop up and will absorb it? That's what time will tell. Everybody thought that with every industrial revolution, advancements, jobs will be lost and will be all gone. But employment just keeps happening. Population keeps increasing and people are still employed, right? So something else will create some other avenue of work will create, which is very difficult to predict at this point. But that will absorb some of the creative aspects which are getting released by doing the mundane work. Right, so it'll all net out, but for sure, repetitive workers, if that's all they are focused on, then that's a job at risk. That much I'm very confident of.
I would extend that a little bit, Kapil, and even say, like at Yardi, we've been very careful at how we use AI, but making sure that we're empowering staff and changing roles. And those repetitive things very much are at risk. It also extended up towards like mid-level management, where it's like, I actually think that area is one of the areas that like I'd be worried about. But the evolution of great people will always find great roles, and their value isn't necessarily in what they do today, but it's in what they can do tomorrow. And saying that because you are a corn farmer 20 years ago or 30 years or 40 years ago, that's all you can do. I have maybe an optimism of humans and workers in general that we can evolve and continue to provide value, and there will still be jobs available even as AI comes in to take over parts of our jobs that we're doing. And I can't wait until it takes over some of the jobs that I do where I have to look at metrics on my team. Like I would love that. And having that feedback. And I think that evolution is positive. It's uncomfortable, but it is positive. And I know for our company, we've been very open and honest on where we're looking to do things, and knowing that people do have a home in their work and in the company as we apply AI internally.
So I'm just going to throw in a historic point.
Okay.
I would tell the questioner to look up the word Luddite, which is with two Ds.
Okay. And Cliff, the first part of what you said sounded like a perfect encapsulated quote that we're going to have to pull out of this and use wisely. More specifically, how might AI reduce the role of brokers in real estate? And this sounds like I remember this question from 20 years ago with online auctions and online services. So it's a question that's come up before. But anytime there's this kind of change, it's a natural question. So I won't answer it. I'm the moderator. I shall leave that to you, but I have a feeling I know some of what you're going to say. Anybody wants to address brokers' concerns specifically?
So, I mean, I can, in my opinion, these tools will be complementary to the brokerage function. If you're talking about a 5 foot by 5 foot shoe shine shop, yeah, I mean, AI can deal with that. But if you look at complicated deals in New York City, it's they will be complementary, but they will not be substitutes.
I think it goes back, Tim, to your point around brokers and leasing, where real estate is a relational industry. It's humans to humans. And at the end of the day, you still look folks in the eye and decide what it is, and then go through the numbers separate. And I think it will allow brokers to go through the numbers much, much faster, so those discussions can continue to happen. But there's still a human on the other side of that. And if you were doing deal sheets before Excel, you still had your deal sheets and they were still going through and being done. Excel accelerated the ability to have those standardized and computed quicker, and then modeled faster in the past 10 years. But brokers became just as valuable. And at the end of the day, the complexity is so high. I think it just becomes another tool in their tool belt. for them to be that much more effective and that much more valuable overall.
Okay, we are pretty much out of time. Does anybody have any last thoughts to share with our audience before we close? Why
I
don't
would say
we?
as you're looking at
Yes.
your organization, try to demystify AI for your employees, then it'll become easier to get it adopted in the organization.
Another great quote.
Demystify the unmystical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll be a little simpler on that one. It is really starting small and snowballing forward. Your teams have great ideas, empowering them to take the first step and then continuing to evolve it. You'll find out very quickly that you can be very effective with some very small things that your staff already knows and is already thinking about.
Great, thank you. And I know we had some other questions that got into so much detail that we wouldn't have had time in the hour, but I do appreciate those questions, and we'd certainly love to address them in other ways in the future. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will be sending you all a link when the recording is available. And if you enjoyed today's session, we hope you'll be able to join us for our next CPE Voices webinar, which is our mid-year outlook, which will be taking place in June, specific date to be determined. So keep an eye out for that. And if you'd like some perspective on the multifamily sector, you'll want to register for our upcoming MHN Voices webinar next month. Speakers, I'd like to thank you all for this very interesting discussion, and our audience, thank you all again for joining us.